Phone rang at 2047 in the morning. I know the exact time because I'd been lying awake anyway, the way I do most nights since my wife passed. The bedroom gets too quiet after 63 years of sharing it with someone. So I was staring at the ceiling, listening to the heat kick on and off, when my phone lit up on the nightstand. My daughter's name. I picked up before the second ring. Daddy. Her voice was wrong. Not scared. Wrong. Smaller than that. Like something in her had already given up. Nora. What's going on, sweetheart? I need you to come get me. A pause. Then, quieter, please don't ask me anything yet. Just come. I was already sitting up. Where are you? I'm at the house. Patrick's house. She meant her husband's parents' place out in Clover Ridge, about 40 minutes from me on a good night. They took my keys, Daddy. Patrick took my keys and my phone charger, and I had to borrow Aunt Bev's old flip phone from the junk drawer, and I don't know how much battery is left, and I just need you to... The line went quiet for a second. Nora, I'm here. Just come. Please don't call me back. I don't want them to hear it ring. She hung up. I want to tell you I thought it through. I want to say I sat on the edge of that bed and made a calm, rational plan. But I'm 64 years old, and that was my little girl on the phone. And what I actually did was put on whatever pants were closest, grab my keys off the hook by the door, and get in my truck. I called 911 from the driveway. I know some people reading this will say I should have called sooner, or that calling at all was the wrong move, or that I should have had a lawyer on speed dial. Maybe they're right, but I called because I wanted someone official to know where I was going and why. Before I got there, the dispatcher took down the address. She said she'd send a unit to do a welfare check. She told me not to go inside. I thanked her and drove anyway. The thing is, I didn't know yet how bad it was. I thought maybe Patrick and Nora had another one of their fights. Patrick Lund was not a man I'd ever want to. Too slick, smiled too easily. The kind of guy who shakes your hand and looks just past your shoulder while he's doing it. But Nora loved him, so I'd kept my mouth shut for 4 years. I told myself I was being a good father. Told myself I was respecting her choices. I was 40 minutes away, and she'd had to borrow a secret phone to call me. A good father would have paid closer attention. Clover Ridge is one of those developments that went up fast in the late 90s. Big houses, narrow lots, 2-car garages on every one. The Loon house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, lights off except for one upstairs window and the porch light. I pulled up slow. No police unit yet. I went to the front door and knocked. 30 seconds, a minute. I knocked again, harder. The porch light flicked off. Someone was home. I can see the shadow under the door, I said, loud enough to carry through the wood. I'm Nora's father. I'm not leaving without knowing she's all right. The door opened. Not all the way, about 8 inches. Chain still on. Patrick's mother, Deb Lund, looked at me through the gap. She's a small woman in her late 50s, always put together, always smiling at family dinners. She wasn't smiling now. It's almost 3 in the morning, she said. Yes, ma'am, it is. I need to see my daughter. Nora is sleeping. She's fine. You need to go home. I'd see her and then I'll go home. She's sleeping. Said it again like repetition made it truer. Mrs. Lund, I'm not asking for much. I just want to lay eyes on her. She started to close the door. I put my hand on it. Not hard. I just stopped it. She called me, I said. She told me to come. Something shifted in the woman's face. Not guilt exactly. More like calculation. She was upset earlier. She and Patrick had a disagreement. She's calmed down. Everything is fine, and you coming here in the middle of the night is only going to make it worse. Then let me see her calm and fine, and I'll get out of your way. She's asleep. I'm not waking her up. We stood there like that for a moment, her hand on the door from inside, my hand on it from outside, both of us pretending we were having a normal conversation. I'm going to stand here until I see her, I said, or until the police get here. One of those things is going to happen. Her jaw tightened. You're being dramatic. Maybe. I'd love to be wrong. Show me Nora. She closed the door. I heard the chain come off. Then it opened all the way and she stepped back, her arms crossed over her robe, watching me like I was the problem. I stepped inside. The living room was dark. The kitchen light was on and I could hear someone moving around back there. Drawers opening, water running. Patrick, I figured. She's upstairs, Deb said. Second door on the left. But I'm telling you she's fine and you're going to wake her up and she's going to be angry with you for causing a scene. I went up the stairs. The second door on the left was closed. I knocked softly. Nora, it's Dad. Nothing. I knocked again. Baby girl, it's me. You don't have to say anything. Just let me know you're okay. Still nothing. I turned the handle. Locked. And that's when something cold moved through me. Not fear exactly. I've been afraid before and I know what that feels like. This was different. This was the specific cold of a parent who suddenly understands that the situation is worse than they thought. Nora. Louder now. Nora, I need to hear your voice. Patrick appeared at the top of the stairs. He was dressed, jeans, a button-down shirt, like he'd never been to bed at all. He was 31 years old, and he looked at me the way men look at things they don't consider a real threat. She locked herself in, he said. She does this when she's upset. Drama. You know how she gets. Open the door. I don't have tickets. Open the door. I don't have a key for open the door or I will. He laughed, actually laughed. You're going to break down a door in my house? I turned back to the door. Nora, can you hear me? Make a sound if you can hear me. Silence. I stepped back and kicked it just below the handle. It took 2 tries. The frame splintered and the door swung in and I found my daughter on the bathroom tile. And I will not describe to you exactly what I saw because some things a father carries alone. I will tell you she was breathing. I will tell you she was not conscious. I will tell you there was a piss bottle on the floor near her hand that was empty and had been full that afternoon. I called 911 again. Same number, different kind of emergency. I don't know what happened in the next few minutes in any organized way. I know I was on the floor with her. I know I was talking to her even though she couldn't hear me. I know Patrick stood in the doorway saying something about how she did this for attention, and I said something back to him that I am not proud of, but do not regret. The paramedics arrived before the police unit did. Then the police arrived and there were a lot of people in a small hallway and someone was asking me to step back and I wouldn't. Not until I could see they were actually helping her. They took her out on a stretcher. I tried to follow. An officer stopped me. Young guy, couldn't have been more than 25. Looked like he'd drawn the short straw for this call. He told me I needed to stay. I told him that was my daughter on that stretcher. Then Patrick appeared beside him and started talking. I want to be very precise about what happened next, because this is the part that matters, the part that changed everything, the part I go back to when I need to remind myself why I did what I did in the weeks that followed. Patrick Lund put his hand on that young officer's shoulder and said, My father-in-law forced his way into our home. He broke down a door. We never let him in. He pushed past my mother. I'm not sure of what he's capable of, and honestly I'm a little concerned for everyone's safety. The officer looked at me. I am a 64-year-old man in mismatched clothes at 3 in the morning with sawdust still on my boots from the week's work. My daughter had just been carried out of the house on a stretcher. I was shaking. I can imagine exactly what I looked like. They let me ride to the hospital, but they followed close behind. At the ER, while Nora was being taken back, another officer sat across from me in the waiting room and asked me to walk him through the night. I did. All of it. The phone call, the 911 call from my driveway, the door. I told him I had a recording of the 911 call that would show I'd contacted them before I ever arrived. He wrote things down and didn't say much. Patrick and Deb arrived 20 minutes later. Patrick went straight to the nurse's station. Deb sat down in the waiting room, on the far side from me, and stared at her hands. At some point, a doctor came out and told me my daughter was stable. I went outside to the parking lot and sat on a concrete barrier and cried for a while. I'm not embarrassed about that. I cried because she was alive and because I almost hadn't gone. Because for about 10 seconds after she'd called, I'd almost talked myself into waiting until morning. And if I had done that, I would have gotten a different phone call with a different message, and I would not have survived it. Then I went back inside and I started making calls of my own. The first was to my brother-in-law Hank, who's an attorney, not the kind who handles criminal stuff, but he knew who did. And at 4 in the morning he answered on the second ring and listened to everything I said and gave me a name and number and told me to call the moment the office opened. The second call was to my friend Lou, who'd retired from the sheriff's department 6 years ago and still knew everyone worth knowing in the county. I told him what Patrick had said to the officer. Lou was quiet for a moment and then said, "Send me everything you've got." I sent him the timestamp on my 911 call. I sent him the text Nora had sent to my old number 2 days before that I hadn't understood at the time. Something about feeling trapped and not knowing how to explain it. Small things. But Lou said small things add up. Over the next 3 days, while Nora was in the hospital and I was sleeping in a chair in the waiting room and eating whatever came out of the vending machines, I started to understand the full shape of what had been happening. Her bank account, the one she'd had since college, the one I'd helped her open, had been switched to a joint account without her clear knowledge. The funds transferred to cover what Patrick called household expenses. Her car had been put in his name during a refinancing she'd signed but hadn't fully understood. She hadn't worked in 2 years because he'd convinced her to quit. Said it was so she could focus on the home. And without income, she had no financial independence, no credit activity in her own name. She was 31 years old and she owned nothing. My daughter is a smart woman. I want to say that clearly. She has a degree from a good school. She reads constantly. She is sharper than most people twice her age. What happened to her did not happen because she was foolish. It happened slowly, over years, the way these things always happen. One small concession at a time. One door closing so quietly you don't hear the lock. When she was strong enough to talk, she told me she'd been trying to figure out how to leave for 8 months. That she'd had conversations with Patrick about divorce, and each time he'd ended up in tears, talking about how much he loved her and she'd felt guilty and stayed. That his mother had told her more than once that she had nowhere to go and no way to support herself, and that Patrick was the best thing that would ever happen to her. I listened to all of it. I didn't interrupt. I didn't say what I was thinking, which was that I wanted to drive back to that house in Clover Ridge and have a very different conversation than the one we'd had at the front door. What I did instead was call the attorney whose name my brother-in-law had given me. Her name was Angie Soros, and she was exactly the kind of person you want in your corner when everything is on fire. Calm, precise, didn't waste a word. I explained the situation. She asked me a series of questions I wasn't expecting, about timelines and documents and communications. Then she said, the financial coercion is actually our strongest angle. The car title, the joint account. We may be looking at financial abuse under state statute, which changes things considerably. I didn't know that was a thing. I do now. She also told me something important about the night the police had come. Because I had called 911 before arriving, and because my call was time-stamped before any complaint Patrick filed, I was in a significantly better legal position than Patrick probably realized. He may have told a story to that officer, Angie said, but the 911 log does a different one. The sequence matters. I'd been so worried about being in trouble that I hadn't thought about what my 911 call actually proved. The weeks that followed were not clean or simple. There is no version of this story where a switch gets flipped and everything gets fixed overnight. Nora had to be discharged from the hospital and she couldn't go back to that house and she didn't want to. But she also felt guilty, which I did not fully understand at first. Her therapist explained it to me later. When someone has spent years being told that every feeling they have is an overreaction, it becomes hard to trust their own instincts. She knew what she'd been through. She also kept wondering if she was being unfair to Patrick. She stayed in my house, her old room. I put clean sheets on the bed and I stocked the fridge with the things she liked when she was a kid. The orange juice with pulp, the specific brand of crackers, the sharp cheddar, and I did not make any of this into a conversation unless she wanted it to be one. She slept for most of the first week. I let her sleep. Angie filed for divorce on Nora's behalf. She also contacted the DA's office with the documentation on the financial coercion. I don't know exactly what was said in those conversations because they didn't involve me, and that's how it should be. It was Nora's life and Nora's decisions. But I know that Patrick and his attorney made several attempts to settle quickly and privately, which Angie said was a good sign for our side. There was a morning about 3 weeks in when I came downstairs to find Nora sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a legal pad, writing things down. She looked up when I came in, and she looked up when I came in, and she looked different. Not fixed, but like herself, like the person I'd watched grow up in that house. I made a list, she said, of what things I'm going to do when this is over. She slid the pad across the table. It was practical stuff. Get a job, open an account in her name only, look into a certification she'd always wanted. At the bottom underlined, call Aunt Bev and thank her for the phone. I laughed. First time in weeks. I didn't even know she had a flip phone, Nora said. Your Aunt Bev has everything. She's been keeping stuff since 1987. Nora smiled. Small, careful, like a muscle she hadn't used in a while. Daddy, she said, I'm sorry you had to drive out there in the middle of the night. I looked at her for a moment. Don't ever say that again. She nodded. Okay. The day you stop calling me when you need me is the day I've done something wrong. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine, and we sat like that for a minute without saying anything. I am not going to tell you that Patrick Lund got everything he deserved, because the legal system doesn't work that way, and I've made my peace with that. What I will tell you is that the divorce was finalized, that Nora walked away with her fair share plus remediation for the financial coercion, that she has her own apartment now and her own checking account and a job she genuinely likes, that she's in therapy and it's helping. Patrick's family still lives in Clover Ridge. I have driven past that house exactly once since that night. I didn't stop. Deb Lund sent Nora a card at some point during the divorce proceedings. Nora showed it to me once. I won't say what was in it except that it was the kind of thing you write when you know you were wrong but you decided not to say so directly. Nora threw it away without responding, which I thought showed excellent judgment. There are things I think about. Late at night when the house is quiet again, I think about the 10 seconds in my driveway when I almost waited until morning. I think about the 911 call I almost didn't make and what would have happened if I hadn't been able to say, I called before I got there. I think about the pill bottle on the bathroom floor. I think about my daughter at that kitchen table with her legal pad, writing down the names of things she was going to do. People ask me sometimes, usually other fathers, men around my age, what I would tell them if their kid called in the middle of the night. And I always say the same thing. Go. Call before you get there, so there's a record. Get a lawyer involved the moment you understand the shape of what you're dealing with. But go. The other stuff can be figured out, the legal stuff, the financial stuff, the what do we do next stuff. There are people who know how to handle all of that, and you'll find them. But you have to go first. I don't regret a single mile of that drive. I've had a lot of time to sit with everything that happened. The nights are still quiet in this house, and quiet gives you space to think whether you want it to or not. What I keep coming back to is this. Nothing that happened to Nora occurred overnight. Patrick didn't wake up one morning and decide to control her. Deb didn't suddenly decide her son's comfort mattered more than my daughter's safety. It happened in increments. One small thing, then another, until the increments had added up to a life my daughter didn't recognize as her own. That's how it always works. The big damage is almost never one catastrophic moment. It's 100 small ones that nobody names out loud. And here's what I've had to reckon with as her father. I missed most of those 100 small moments. Not because I wasn't paying attention, but because I was paying the wrong kind of attention. I was looking for a bruise, a broken bone, something visible and obvious. I wasn't listening for the way her voice got careful when she talked about Patrick. I wasn't noticing that she stopped bringing up her own plans, her own opinions, her own wants. I thought respecting her choices meant going quiet. I was wrong. There's a difference between respecting someone's choices and going so quiet you can't hear them struggling. What I know now, what that night taught me, is that love without attention is just a feeling. It doesn't do anything. Nora needed more than my love. She needed me to stay awake, to pay the kind of attention that notices what's not being said. That's the work. And I'd stopped doing it because I told myself she was an adult and it wasn't my place. I think about Patrick a lot too, and not with the anger I carried for the first few months. What I've landed on is something quieter than anger, and in some ways harder to sit with. He is a man who learned somewhere along the way that the people closest to you are resources to be managed. That controlling someone is the same thing as keeping them. That love is a transaction. Nobody is born believing that. Somebody taught him. And the cost of that belief, to Nora, to himself, eventually to whatever life he has now, is something he'll carry whether he understands it or not. People who build walls around others always end up on the inside of them too. Nora is the part of the story I think about with the most complicated feeling. She is braver than she knows. Not because she survived that night, though she did, but because she chose to keep going afterward. She chose therapy when it would have been easier not to. She chose to put her name back on her own life, one document at a time. That league bad on the kitchen table. Those handwritten lines. That was not a small thing. That was a person deciding that what happened to her was not the final word on who she was. I'm not going to tell you I handled everything right. I drove out there without a real plan. I broke a door. I cried in a parking lot. But I went. And I think that's the one thing none of us can afford to get wrong. When someone you love calls, in whatever way they're able to call, you go. You figure out the rest from there. Some things you only understand after you've almost lost them. I'd rather have learned it a different way. But I didn't. So I hold on to it now, as carefully as I know how.